The U.S. government has been shut down for weeks. The Senate has voted 9 times to end the crisis and failed every single time. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees are out of work, military families are going without pay, and Washington is paralyzed. The question now isn't just when the government will reopen, it's whether the two major parties can even govern together anymore. Hey everyone, welcome back to your channel name. Today, we're diving deep into one of the biggest political crises of 2025, the U.S. government shutdown and the Senate deadlock that has shaken Washington to its core. As of mid-October, America's government remains closed for business. The crisis began on October 1st, when Congress failed to approve funding for the new fiscal year. Now, weeks later, the gridlock between Republicans and Democrats has only hardened. In this video, we'll break down how this all started, what both sides are fighting for, how the shutdown is affecting millions of Americans, and what could happen next. By the end, you'll see why this isn't just another partisan battle. It's a test of leadership, democracy, and the limits of political power in the world's most influential government. Let's start with how we got here. Every year, Congress must pass appropriations bills to fund federal agencies for the next fiscal year. That deadline was October 1, 2025. But when the clock struck midnight, no funding deal had been reached. The trigger was simple yet politically explosive. Republicans, now holding the House and narrowly controlling the Senate, pushed a stopgap funding bill to keep the government open until January. Democrats refused to go along, arguing that the plan ignored key social and healthcare programs that millions of Americans rely on. At the heart of the dispute were Affordable Care Act tax credits, Medicaid cuts, and a handful of spending restrictions proposed by the Trump administration. Democrats demanded that the spending bill include an extension of healthcare subsidies and full restoration of Medicaid funding. They said it wasn't acceptable to kick the can down the road while families risked losing affordable coverage. Republicans, meanwhile, argued that the government needed to be reopened first before any broader negotiations took place. To them, adding policy conditions to a short-term funding bill was political blackmail. Neither side blinked. The deadline passed. And for the first time since the 2018 shutdown, in the days that followed, both chambers of Congress tried and failed to move forward. The House of Representatives, led by Speaker Mike Johnson, passed a temporary funding bill that Republicans framed as a clean, continuing resolution, meaning no added provisions, just a simple measure to reopen the government until November 21. Democrats in the Senate blocked it immediately, calling it empty and irresponsible. They countered with their own version of the bill, which restored the Affordable Care Act subsidies, reversed some proposed Medicaid cuts, and funded several domestic programs the Trump administration wanted to slash. But that version failed, too. It didn't even come close to the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster in the Senate. And from that point on, the deadlock only deepened. As the shutdown dragged into its second week, the Senate became ground zero for political paralysis. 9 separate votes to advance funding bills have failed. The latest, held on October 14, collapsed 49 to 45, well short of the 60-vote threshold required. Not a single Democrat broke ranks to join the Republican plan. And no Republican supported the Democrats' alternative. The atmosphere in the Senate chamber has grown tense and bitter. Negotiations happen behind closed doors. But every public statement from leaders like Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell shows how little trust remains. Schumer has accused Republicans of holding the American people hostages by refusing to consider health care funding, while Republicans claim Democrats are the ones weaponizing the shutdown to push through unrelated policy demands. Republicans insist their bill is clean, no policy riders, just funding to keep the lights on. They argue that Democrats can't justify keeping government agencies closed just to secure a political win. Some Republicans even offered a symbolic vote on healthcare subsidies after reopening the government, but Democrats dismissed it as a stalling tactic. On the other side, Democrats argue that reopening the government without addressing healthcare is worse than doing nothing. They say millions of working-class Americans will face higher insurance costs if the subsidies expire, and that allowing the government to reopen under those terms would be a betrayal of voters who count on that support. In their view, the crisis isn't just about money, it's about moral responsibility. As the political fight intensifies, the human cost grows by the day. Around 900,000 federal employees have been furloughed, sent home without pay. Another 700,000 are still working, but they're doing it without paychecks. These include air traffic controllers, TSA officers, FBI agents, Border Patrol officers, and military personnel. Across the country, stories of struggle are emerging. Families are dipping into savings to pay rent and buy groceries. Federal contractors, who often don't get back pay when the shutdown ends, are being hit even harder. National parks are closed, passport applications are piling up, and scientific research at agencies like the NIH and CDC has ground to a halt. And then there's the looming threat of permanent layoffs. The Trump administration announced a plan to carry out a reduction in force, or RIF, that could terminate thousands of federal employees, not just furlough them temporarily. That would make this shutdown fundamentally different from any in modern history. Critics argue that such mass firings violate the Anti-Deficiency Act and other labor protections, and several unions have filed lawsuits to block them. Just days ago, a federal judge temporarily halted the firings, citing potential legal violations. But uncertainty still hangs over the federal workforce. The White House hasn't exactly calmed the storm. President Trump and his allies have doubled down, using both political and media pressure to shape the narrative. The administration released a video that was played on airport screens across the country, blaming Democrats for the shutdown, a move critics say violates the Hatch Act, which prohibits the use of federal resources for partisan messaging. Trump also promised to release a list of what he called Democrat programs that would be permanently defunded if no deal is reached. The list reportedly includes funding for public broadcasting, arts and culture endowments, and environmental initiatives. Supporters call it a bold move to rein in government waste. Opponents say it's blatant political retaliation designed to punish blue-leaning institutions. The messaging war has spilled onto social media, with both sides using hashtags like #ReopenGovernment and Stop the Shutdown to rally their bases. Republican leaders blame Democrats for tying healthcare to government funding. Democrats say Republicans could end the crisis in an hour if they simply agreed to restore subsidies for working families. Neither narrative is fully winning. The public's trust poll show Americans are angry at both parties, though slightly more blame is directed at the GOP and the White House. The longer the shutdown drags on, the deeper the economic wounds become. Economists estimate the crisis is costing the U.S. economy billions of dollars every week in lost productivity, delayed contracts, and consumer uncertainty. The stock market has begun showing volatility, especially in sectors tied to federal spending, defense, infrastructure, and healthcare. Federal workers are delaying car and mortgage payments. Local businesses that rely on government workers, diners near federal offices, daycare centers near military bases, are seeing sharp drops in revenue. Even air travel is feeling the strain as unpaid TSA and air traffic control staff call in sick in growing numbers. Historically, shutdowns end when one side's political pressure outweighs its negotiating leverage. But this one feels different. The divide isn't just about spending levels, it's ideological. Democrats view healthcare and social spending as core moral obligations. Republicans see them as fiscal anchors and political leverage points. Each believes giving in would destroy their credibility ahead of the 2026 midterms. As the Senate gridlock drags on, frustration is spilling into the streets and across state capitals. Federal workers have staged protests in Washington, New York, and Denver, holding signs that read, "We just want to work." Several states are now advancing their own emergency funding measures to keep key programs running temporarily, a reminder of how federal paralysis can ripple through every layer of government. Public opinion is shifting fast. Polls show a majority of Americans want an immediate reopening of the government, even if that means one side compromises. But neither side seems ready to move. Some moderate senators have begun floating bipartisan mini-deals, narrow bills that could fund specific agencies like the Department of Defense or Veterans Affairs, while larger negotiations continue. Yet leadership on both sides has rejected piecemeal funding as an unacceptable half measure. In private, Senate aides say negotiations have turned personal and hostile. Democrats feel that Republicans are taking orders from the White House rather than acting independently. Republicans feel Democrats are using the suffering of federal workers as leverage to push unrelated social policies. It's a toxic mix of partisanship, pride, and fear of political backlash. At this point, the big question is, what will finally break the stalemate? Will economic pressure force one side to give in? Will moderates in both parties band together to form a centrist coalition? Or will the crisis continue until public outrage becomes impossible to ignore? Some analysts warn that if this shutdown lasts much longer, the U.S. credit rating could be downgraded, shaking investor confidence and driving up borrowing costs. The irony is that most Americans, regardless of party, agree on one thing: this shouldn't be happening. Nearly every poll shows overwhelming support for avoiding government shutdowns altogether. Yet Congress keeps using them as bargaining chips. The system has turned dysfunction into strategy. And as the days pass, the shutdown isn't just freezing federal agencies, it's freezing trust in government itself. Young voters watching this unfold are seeing a democracy that can't perform its most basic function, keeping its doors open. Federal employees are questioning whether public service is worth the risk. The longer this continues, the harder it will be to rebuild morale and confidence in the system. Behind the scenes, both parties are calculating the political cost. For Republicans, the risk is being seen as indifferent to ordinary Americans suffering, especially if Trump's threats of permanent cuts come to pass. For Democrats, the danger lies in overplaying their hand and appearing unwilling to compromise. The 2026 elections are already looming large over these decisions. Each move in the Senate chamber doubles as a campaign ad in waiting. History has shown that shutdowns rarely help the parties seen as responsible. In 2018, it was Trump who bore the brunt of the backlash. In 2013, it was Republicans in Congress. But in 2025, the lines are blurrier. The political battlefield is more polarized, and social media amplifies outrage rather than empathy. Now, imagine if this continues for another month. Federal aid programs could start running out of funds entirely. Food assistance, housing vouchers, and education grants could all freeze. National security operations could be disrupted as defense contractors run out of money. And every passing day would make recovery harder. Financial markets don't like uncertainty, and the shutdown is feeding it. Business leaders from Wall Street to Silicon Valley have begun pressuring Congress to act. Even conservative think tanks are warning that prolonged dysfunction could damage America's global credibility. Allies abroad are watching closely, wondering whether Washington can still manage its own affairs. At this stage, the options are limited. One possible outcome is that a group of moderate senators, perhaps led by centrists from both parties, crafts a compromise that extends funding for a few months while committing to a formal healthcare negotiation. Another option is that the president invokes limited emergency powers to redirect funds, though that would almost certainly trigger more lawsuits. The third and most likely outcome? Political exhaustion. Historically, shutdowns end not because of breakthroughs, but because the pain becomes unbearable politically and economically. The party seen as taking the blame eventually yields just enough to reopen the government, declare victory, and move on. Yet the scars will remain. Federal workers will remember the missed paychecks. Voters will remember which senators they saw fighting or failing for them. The world will remember that the United States, the same country that lectures others about democracy, couldn't keep its own government running. This 2025 shutdown is more than a budget dispute. It's a reflection of how deeply divided Washington has become and how fragile governance looks when compromise is treated as betrayal. So here we are, a nation at a standstill, waiting for the Senate to do its job. The 2025 government shutdown has already become one of the costliest in history, both financially and politically. And until lawmakers find the courage to bridge the divide, millions of Americans will keep paying the price for a government that refuses to function. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to keep more people informed about what's really happening behind the headlines. Drop a comment below. Who do you think is most to blame for the 2025 shutdown? And what do you think it'll take to end this crisis once and for all? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.